From the moment your eyes first opened, you were told the world was already waiting for you. Solid, finished, unchanging. A room you simply stepped into. A universe that existed in full detail, whether you noticed it or not. And yet, think about your own life for a second. How many times has the same day looked completely different, simply because you were different inside it? How many times has a familiar street felt strange, or a familiar face felt distant, or a simple sentence carried a weight it never had before? So here is the quiet question we're going to drift with tonight. What if reality isn't something you live inside, but something that forms as you meet it? What if the world doesn't arrive fully built? What if it comes into focus the way an image sharpens when you adjust a lens? What if nothing becomes fully real until awareness touches it? Not as a dramatic claim, not as a fantasy, just as a gentle possibility to hold in your mind, the way you hold warm tea between your hands on a cold night. Because when you look closely, your entire experience happens in one place, within perception. Every color, every sound, every memory, every fear, every hope. You don't step outside awareness to confirm the world. You only ever encounter the world through the field of noticing. And maybe that means something simple and enormous. Maybe the universe isn't out there at all, distant, cold, indifferent. Maybe it's closer than that. Maybe it's the mirror quietly forming in the depth of your own perception. If that sounds strange, that's okay. We won't rush it. We'll take it slowly, the way sleep does. One soft thought at a time, letting the mind loosen its grip on certainty. And as we go, you don't need to memorize anything. You don't need to figure it out. Just listen and let the questions do what questions do best. Open a little space inside you. If you're here with me tonight, take a second to gently tap like. It helps this calm corner of YouTube reach more tired minds. And if you want more slow, dreamy journeys through quantum mysteries, subscribe to the Quantum Slumber. And in the comments, tell me something simple. Where are you listening from tonight? There's a subtle trick the mind learns very early, so early we almost never notice it happening. Before you had words, the world didn't arrive as a collection of separate things. It arrived as sensation, warmth and shadow, movement and color, the rise and fall of sound. Experience was more like weather than like objects, a single flowing atmosphere. But then slowly, language stepped in. A sound became a label became a boundary, and a boundary became a belief. Sky, tree, hand, mine, yours. And in that quiet naming, something split. Not the world itself, but the way it was felt. The mind began to carve the seamless field of experience into pieces, and in doing so, it produced a new idea. I am here, and everything else is out there. That one idea is the first deception. Because once you believe you're separate, life starts to feel like a negotiation. You search for safety as if it's located somewhere outside your own being. You chase meaning as if it's hidden in future moments. You reach for love like it's a distant object you have to earn. And even when you're surrounded by people, a quiet distance can remain. An invisible gap between me and the world. You can feel the cost of that gap in the body. A tightness in the chest, a restless scanning of the day, a subtle bracing as if something might go wrong at any time. Separation doesn't always sound dramatic. Often it just feels like tension, without a clear reason. So, for a moment, let's do something simple. Notice the air moving in and out of you. Notice the steady work of your heart, keeping time in the dark without asking permission. Feel how effortlessly experience is happening. Thoughts arriving, sensations changing, sound appearing and fading. All of it is already held inside awareness, without you needing to push or pull. And in that noticing, you may sense something gentle. The boundary between inside and outside isn't as solid as it seems. It's more like a habit of perception, a story the mind repeats until it feels unquestionable. If you've ever felt even a brief moment where the world seemed more intimate, where everything felt strangely connected, leave a comment with the word connected. I read them, and it helps this space feel like a quiet room we share. And now, Here's where quantum physics quietly corrects the myth. For over a century, a small and stubborn experiment has been sitting at the center of physics like a quiet riddle no one can completely put to rest. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand belief. It simply repeats itself and leaves the same strange fingerprint behind, no matter how many times we run it. In the early 1900s, scientists began firing tiny pieces of matter, electrons, toward a barrier with two narrow openings. The expectation was simple. If electrons are little pellets, they should travel like miniature bullets. Some would pass through the left slit, some through the right, and they would land on a screen behind the barrier in two neat clusters. But that isn't what happened. Instead of two clusters, the screen filled with a delicate pattern of ripples, bands of light and dark, like the overlapping rings you see when two stones disturb the surface of a still pond. A wave pattern, not the signature of particles, but the signature of possibility spreading out and interfering with itself. It was as if each electron didn't choose a single path. It behaved as though it traveled through both slits at once. Not as a solid thing, but as a wave of probabilities, exploring every route it could take. And then came the moment that turned this experiment into legend. The scientists wondered which slit each electron was actually passing through. So they did what any curious mind would do. They placed a measuring device near the slits to detect the electron's path. They weren't trying to change the outcome. They were simply trying to know. But the moment they watched, the pattern changed. The ripples vanished. The graceful interference pattern collapsed into something blunt and ordinary. The electrons began landing like particles again, as if, under observation, each one was forced to choose, left slit or right slit, this path or that path, a single outcome. It didn't matter how gentle the measurement was. It didn't matter how advanced the equipment became. Over and over, the same rule returned like a whisper you can't unhear. When you do not observe, reality behaves like a wave of potential. When you do observe, reality behaves like a definite thing. This is the heartbeat of the quantum mystery. Not because it's spooky, not because it's mystical, but because it breaks the old assumption that the universe is a completed object sitting out there, doing its thing independently of awareness. The experiment suggests something far more intimate. It suggests that the act of looking is not passive. To look is to participate. In the classical world, we imagine observation as a camera. The world happens. We record it. The observation doesn't change what is observed. It merely documents it. But the double-slit experiment offers a different kind of reality, one where awareness and outcome are tangled together at the root. And if that feels unsettling, take it slowly. You don't have to decide what it means right now. You can simply rest with what it shows, that at the smallest scales, the universe doesn't behave like a fixed stage. It behaves like a field of options. And the moment measurement enters, one option becomes real. Observation is selection, a single note emerging from a silent symphony of possibilities. And the most interesting part is that observation in physics doesn't require a pair of human eyes staring dramatically at a screen. It can mean any interaction that extracts information, any contact that forces the system to commit to a definite state. Yet, when we translate this idea into lived experience, it lands with a surprisingly personal weight. Because your entire life is made of moments that become real only when you meet them. Think about how quickly your mind turns possibility into certainty. A glance at a message, a tone of voice, a silence. Instantly, your awareness selects an interpretation. Your body responds. Your emotions harden around the meaning you chose. The world begins to organize itself around that collapse. You might say, that's just psychology. And yes, psychology lives here too. But the deeper point is about the architecture of experience itself. In the quantum story, the electron is not a tiny marble with a secret route you simply haven't discovered yet. It is described as a spread of probabilities, an entire range of potential outcomes. And the moment information is extracted, the spread resolves into a specific result. Now, You don't need to turn your daily life into a laboratory to feel the echo of that principle. Just notice the difference between looking through fear and looking through curiosity. Fear narrows your perception. It collapses reality into threat. It selects the version of the moment where danger is the center of the story. It's not that the world becomes objectively worse. It's that your awareness keeps choosing the same kind of outcome, again and again, until that outcome feels like the truth. Curiosity does something else. It widens the field. It leaves room for multiple meanings to coexist without rushing to lock one in. Curiosity holds possibility open longer. It postpones collapse. And in that extra breath of space, reality often rearranges itself in ways you didn't expect. This is why the double-slit experiment isn't just an odd detail in a textbook. It's a quiet reminder that the observer is never completely separate from the observed, that participation is woven into perception, that the world you experience is not merely what happens out there, but what becomes actual within the meeting point of awareness and the field of possibility. So tonight, don't treat this as a puzzle you must solve. Let it be a soft lens you try on. The next time you notice yourself reacting quickly, tightening, bracing, assuming, pause for a moment and remember the experiment. Remember that even in physics, the act of measuring changes the pattern, and in your own life, attention changes the texture of the moment. And once you see this principle, you start to notice it everywhere, not just in a lab. The strangest thing about the double-slit experiment isn't only what it suggests about electrons, it's what it quietly reveals about you. Because once you accept, even for a moment, that observation changes the pattern. You start to sense a parallel truth in everyday life. The world you experience is never purely the world. It's the world as it passes through the lens of the one who's looking. You can test this without a laboratory. Two people can stand in the same room, hear the same words, witness the same event, and leave with completely different realities inside them. One person walks away feeling insulted, another feels amused. One feels threatened, another feels curious. One sees a closed door, another sees a beginning. The external scene is identical, the inner experience is not. And that difference matters because your inner experience isn't just a private commentary running behind your eyes. It shapes what you notice, what you ignore, what you assume, and what you believe is possible. It selects the meaning of a moment before the moment even has time to settle. In that sense, your perception isn't a window, it's a measuring device. And the mind is measuring constantly, quietly, automatically, collapsing a wide field of possibility into a single interpretation that feels obvious, even inevitable. A friend doesn't reply right away, and the mind chooses a story. They're pulling away. A stranger's expression looks neutral, and the mind chooses a story. They don't like me. A small ache appears in the body, and the mind chooses a story. Something must be wrong. In each case, the raw data is minimal, but the meaning becomes solid. Not because the world demanded that meaning, because the observer supplied it. This is why two people can live in the same city, under the same sky, in the same year, and experience entirely different worlds. Not because reality is subjective in a careless way, but because the act of observing is always an act of selection. You are always meeting the world through a lens, and most of the time, you don't notice the lens. You just see through it. That lens is shaped by memory, by emotion, by expectation, by the quiet beliefs you've carried for so long they've begun to feel like facts. The mind doesn't only record the present, it compares the present to the past, and then fills in the gaps with prediction. And this is efficient. It's how the brain keeps you safe, but it also creates a subtle distortion. You begin to confuse your interpretation with reality itself, and the more certain you become, the narrower the field grows. Fear, especially, is a powerful instrument of collapse. When you look through fear, your attention sharpens toward threat. You notice what confirms danger. You miss what suggests safety. Your body tightens, your thoughts accelerate, and the world begins to feel hard-edged. Not necessarily because the world has changed, but because the observer has. Curiosity works differently. Curiosity doesn't rush to conclude. It doesn't demand immediate certainty. It holds the field open a little longer. It allows multiple meanings to breathe in the same space without forcing one to win. And in that extra breath, something shifts. A delayed reply becomes, maybe they're busy. A neutral expression becomes, maybe I don't know what they're feeling. An ache becomes, let me listen instead of panic. This isn't naive positivity. It's a different quality of observation. In the language of physics, measurement resolves possibility into outcome. In the language of lived experience, attention resolves ambiguity into meaning. Either way, the observer participates. So, when you're tired or stressed or carrying old pain, it isn't only your mood that changes, it's the world that appears around you. The same street looks harsher. The same conversation feels heavier. The same future looks narrower. And when you're calm, when your nervous system softens, things often look different without anything external changing at all. The mind sees options again. The field widens. Life feels less like a trap and more like an unfolding. You've felt this before, even if you didn't name it. There are moments when the mind is so full of assumption that everything it touches becomes predictable. You wake up already certain how the day will go. You enter a conversation already convinced how it will end. You meet a new possibility and dismiss it before it can take shape. Assumption is a kind of measurement device too. It collapses the unknown into the familiar. And that may be the quiet reason why life can start to feel repetitive. Not because nothing new is happening, but because the observer is always selecting the same version of the moment, the same interpretation, the same reaction, the same conclusion. But then sometimes something interrupts the pattern. A pause, a breath, a sudden softness. And the field feels different. Not dramatic, not magical, just more spacious, more alive, more open to surprise. That's the power of noticing the lens. Because once you notice you're looking through fear, you can loosen it. Once you notice you're looking through resentment, you can soften it. Once you notice you're looking through old wounds, you can meet them with a gentler attention. And in that gentler attention, the world begins to rearrange. Not always instantly in visible events, but immediately in texture, in meaning, in the way the next moment feels as it approaches you. So take a small moment now, just as you are. Pause, and notice the tone you're carrying, as if you're listening to your own frequency. Is your attention tight or open? Is it rushing to conclude or willing to wait? Is it bracing or breathing? You don't have to force an answer, just notice. Because the quiet truth is this: you never meet the world raw. You meet it through the state of consciousness you bring to it. And that state is always shaping what becomes real for you, moment by moment, choice by choice, without needing your permission. And if that is true, then the most important question becomes unavoidable. So, what is this field that responds before matter becomes matter? There's a certain kind of question that rises after you've watched the observer change the outcome. Not a question that demands an answer right away, but one that lingers like a faint light behind the eyes. If reality can behave like a field of possibilities, and if observation helps determine what becomes definite, then what is this deeper space where possibilities live before they become things? Most of us were raised to imagine space as emptiness, a silent gap between objects, a cold, neutral distance. But quantum physics suggests something stranger and far more alive, that beneath what we call matter, there may be a continuous sea of potential, an invisible medium in which everything is suspended. A field. Not a field like a grassy plain, but a field like an ever-present fabric, a subtle continuity that doesn't start at your skin and end at the edge of the room. It stretches through everything, beneath everything, holding the possibility of form, the way the ocean holds the possibility of waves. And if you've ever stood near a shoreline at night, you already know the feeling. The surface can look separate. One wave here, another wave there, each crest rising and falling as if it has its own life. But beneath that movement is a single body of water, unbroken and whole. Every wave is distinct, and yet none of them are truly separate from the sea that gives them shape. This is one of the gentlest ways to approach the idea of a unified field. Not as a technical claim, but as a quiet image. The universe is one vast ocean of potential, and everything you call a thing as a temporary ripple within it. A star is a ripple, a stone is a ripple, a thought is a ripple, a body is a ripple. Different patterns, different densities, different rhythms, but not a different essence. What we experience as separation may be more like the mind's way of tracing outlines on a single continuous surface. We draw borders around what is fluid. We name what is moving. We say this and that, as if the world were made of isolated objects rather than one unfolding process. And when you rest with this idea long enough, something begins to soften. The boundary between inner and outer starts to feel less like a wall and more like a suggestion, a convention, a useful map that we sometimes mistake for the territory, because your experience is already proof of a field. Every sound you hear, every image you see, every sensation in your body, every memory that drifts up without invitation, each of these arises within awareness and dissolves back into it. You never step outside that space to observe it from a distance. You meet everything within the same invisible medium of knowing. This is why ancient traditions and modern physics often circle similar images, even if they use different languages. Science might speak of underlying fields, of unified descriptions, of a deeper continuity beneath particles and forces. Mysticism might speak of oneness, of a single reality wearing countless masks. The vocabulary changes, but the intuition points in one direction. That separateness is not the ultimate truth of things. It's a surface appearance. And the deeper reality may be unity, expressing itself as many. If this feels too grand, bring it back to something simple and close. Think about the way your body holds together, not as a solid statue, but as a living arrangement. Cells turning over, chemistry shifting, electrical signals dancing through nerve pathways. A constant flickering of change held in temporary harmony. You feel like one stable thing, but your stability is an ongoing coherence, an organized rhythm within a larger field of possibility. And out in the cosmos, galaxies form and drift the same way. Patterns of structure arising within a wider sea, held together by relationships, forces, and motion. The scales differ, but the principle rhymes. One movement, appearing as many forms. This is what the ocean and waves metaphor tries to offer. Not an argument, but a way to feel the concept without strain. A way to let the mind relax around it rather than tightening into debate. Because in the sleepy hours, we don't need to win an intellectual contest. We only need to notice what's quietly true in our own experience. Notice how everything you perceive is already connected by the fact that it appears in one continuous awareness. Notice how the idea of me in here and world out there is something the mind repeats, not something you ever directly verify. Notice how the world becomes more intimate the moment you stop insisting on the distance. And when that insistence softens, you may sense something like a background presence, a steadiness beneath the surface of thought. Not a voice, not a vision, just a subtle hum, the way you can feel the engine of a ship beneath the quiet of the cabin, the hum beneath all things. It doesn't announce itself when the mind is racing. It becomes easier to notice when attention is coherent, when you are calm, when you are grateful, when you are quietly present. In those moments, the world can feel less like a collection of separate objects and more like one continuous reality, breathing through different shapes. And perhaps that is the simplest way to understand what unified means. Not that everything looks the same, not that differences disappear, but that differences are expressions of pattern, not divisions of essence. Like music, many notes, many instruments, many rhythms, one song. So, if this field is real, if it is the invisible medium through which everything becomes experience, then a deeper question begins to form without effort. Because a field that holds matter, and a field that holds possibility, and a field that seems to respond to observation, leads naturally to the mystery we've been circling all along. If the field is everywhere, then the next question is unavoidable. Where does consciousness live? Imagine walking into a quiet room where an old radio sits on a wooden table. The dial is warm from use, the speaker cloth slightly faded, the kind of object that seems to hold time inside it. You turn the knob, and music fills the space, clear, alive, perfectly present. And it's easy in that moment to forget what's actually happening, because the song isn't trapped inside the box. If you took the radio apart, removed the screws, lifted the casing, traced every wire and circuit, you would never find a tiny orchestra tucked behind the speaker. You would find components, pathways, a delicate mechanism for receiving something invisible and translating it into sound. The music was always out there, moving through the room as a field of possibility. The radio didn't invent it, it tuned into it. And this is one of the gentlest metaphors for a question that won't stop returning in modern science and ancient philosophy alike. What if the brain is not the source of consciousness, but the instrument through which consciousness becomes experience? For a long time, we were taught a simple story. Consciousness is produced by matter. The brain, with enough complexity, generates awareness the way a furnace generates heat. And certainly, the brain is deeply involved in everything you think, feel, remember, and imagine. Change the brain, and the contents of experience change. Damage it, and the signal becomes distorted. That much is undeniable. But involvement is not the same as origin. A radio is deeply involved in the music you hear. Damage the antenna, and the song crackles. Break the speaker, and the melody becomes muffled. Remove the power source, and the room goes silent. Yet none of that proves the radio created the broadcast. It only proves that the radio is the interface, the translator between the invisible and the audible. So consider the possibility, just as a soft thought, the brain may be doing something similar, not manufacturing awareness from nothing, but tuning into a deeper field and shaping it into the particular experience you call me. In this view, thoughts are not tiny objects produced in a closed skull. They are patterns, signals, arriving, combining, fading, returning. Your emotions are not merely chemical storms. They are energetic states that color the signal, changing the texture of what you perceive. Your memories are not filed away like paper in a cabinet. They are reconstructions, called up into the present, shaped by whatever frequency you are holding now. And the most interesting part is that you can feel this shift of frequency in your own life without needing a single equation. When your mind is anxious, the world seems sharp and loud. Neutral events feel charged. Small uncertainties become threats. Your attention narrows as if the dial has been turned toward a station filled with static. You can still function, still move through your day, but everything carries a faint distortion. Then sometimes you sit quietly. You breathe more slowly. You stop chasing the next thought. And the world doesn't change, yet it does. The same room feels softer. The same problems feel less absolute. Your body releases a little, and your mind becomes more spacious, as if the signal has cleared. Nothing external needed to shift for that change to occur. The receiver changed. This is why states like meditation, creativity, and love have such a distinct signature in human experience. They don't just make you feel different, they make reality look different. They seem to reorganize perception itself, bringing coherence to what was scattered. Neuroscience describes this in its own language: patterns of neural oscillation, rhythms of attention, synchrony across regions of the brain. The details can become technical, but the felt truth is simple. When your inner world becomes harmonized, your experience becomes clearer. The mind stops fighting itself. The noise reduces. The signal comes through. If consciousness were only a byproduct, only a chemical flame, then these shifts would be nothing more than mood changes. But they often feel deeper than mood. They feel like a change in contact with reality, like you've tuned into a different layer of the same world. And this brings us to a delicate edge where science becomes honest about mystery. No matter how detailed our maps of the brain become, there remains the hard question: why is there experience at all? Why does any electrical activity feel like something from the inside? Why should a pattern of firing neurons produce the taste of memory, the ache of longing, the warmth of joy? the quiet sense of being aware. Some people are satisfied saying, "It just does," and that may be enough for them. But others sense that consciousness might be fundamental, not an accident that appears late in evolution, but a basic ingredient of reality, like space or time or energy. In that picture, biology doesn't create awareness from nothing. Biology shapes awareness into a local, personal perspective, a wave becoming a voice. And if that sounds too abstract, bring it back to the radio again. The broadcast can contain countless songs, countless conversations, countless stories, all overlapping in the same invisible field. The receiver doesn't grab all of them at once. It selects a frequency. It isolates one stream, and that stream becomes the reality in the room. In a similar way, your nervous system may be selecting a stream of conscious experience from a wider field, collapsing a vast range into the single, continuous story you live as now. This can also explain something you've likely noticed. Thoughts do not always feel like they come from you in a mechanical, deliberate way. Many of your best insights arrive unannounced. A sentence forms in your mind, fully shaped. A solution appears while you're washing dishes. A creative idea lands in your awareness like a gift, not like a construction. Artists have described this for centuries. So have scientists. The feeling that something larger moved through them, that they didn't force it so much as receive it. In the receiver metaphor, this makes sense. When the channel is clear, more arrives. And when the channel is cluttered, when the mind is tangled in resentment, shame, or constant overthinking, the signal becomes noisy. Not because the field is punishing you, but because the receiver is overloaded. Static is not a moral failure, it is interference. This is why so many traditions, both spiritual and practical, emphasize the same simple practices. Quiet the mind, soften the body, slow the breath, return to sincerity. Not to become better, but to become clearer, to reduce distortion, to tune the instrument. Of course, there are places where this conversation becomes controversial, and it's important to stay gentle and honest. People tell stories of awareness during moments when the brain seems quiet. Near-death experiences, vivid perceptions during extreme conditions, a sense of clarity that feels larger than the body. Some researchers explore questions of non-local perception and the nature of consciousness beyond the skull. None of this is settled in the way a simple measurement in a physics lab can be settled. But even without claiming certainty, these reports serve as a kind of pressure on the old story. They remind us that we may not yet understand what consciousness is, or where it truly begins. They keep the question open, and openness is where discovery lives. So, rather than arguing, let's return to something you can verify directly. Your state of being changes what you receive from reality. When you are contracted, you perceive contraction. When you are open, you perceive openings. When you are hurried, the world feels like a race. When you are present, the world feels like a place you can actually inhabit. The receiver shapes the experience. And this is not about forcing positivity or pretending everything is fine. A clear receiver doesn't deny pain. It meets pain without distortion. It allows emotion to move without becoming a cage. It notices fear without letting fear become a permanent lens. It lets the signal be honest, not chaotic. So, if the brain is an instrument, the work is not to manufacture consciousness. The work is to clear interference, judgment, constant resistance, the endless demand to control, until awareness becomes clean enough to recognize itself. And when the receiver clears, something else becomes obvious. Reality looks less like a fixed place, and more like a menu of possibilities. There is a quiet way the world reveals itself when you stop thinking of reality as a single, fixed track. When the receiver clears, when the mind becomes a little less noisy, you begin to sense something strange and almost tender beneath the surface of ordinary moments. It's the feeling that the next instant isn't determined, that it's waiting, not as a blank space, but as a wide field, filled with countless possible versions of what could happen next. The next conversation, the next decision, the next turn your life might take. an invisible menu of outcomes hovering just beyond the edge of certainty. Most of the time, we don't experience that openness. We experience one outcome, one storyline, one version of the moment. It feels inevitable, as if it was always going to be this way. But what if inevitability is often just collapse? What if the world you step into is the one you are most prepared to see as real? In quantum physics, a system can hold many possibilities at once until measurement resolves it into a definite result. The language is technical, but the intuition can be felt in daily life. Your attention has weight. Your emotional state has gravity. And together, they shape which possibilities become visible. You can sense this by watching how quickly the mind narrows the future. When you're afraid, the field contracts. You don't just feel fear. You begin selecting a world that matches it. Your mind highlights threats, predicts loss, rehearses rejection. You become exquisitely skilled at finding evidence that supports your anxiety, even when that evidence is thin as smoke. The timeline narrows, not because life is punishing you, but because fear is a powerful filter. It chooses the most defensive version of the moment, the one that confirms danger. It collapses reality toward survival. Stay small, stay guarded. Assume the worst, prepare to be hurt. And when you're in that state, even good opportunities can look suspicious. Even kindness can feel uncertain. Even silence can feel like a verdict. Love does something different. Love doesn't mean romance. It means openness. It means coherence. It means a nervous system that isn't braced for impact. In that state, the field widens. You notice more options. You interpret ambiguity with gentleness instead of threat. You see pathways you literally could not see while contracted. The timeline expands, and the shift between these worlds can be microscopic. No one else might even notice it. But inside you, it changes everything, because you are not merely walking through reality. You are walking through the version of reality your observation makes available. This is where the idea becomes practical. You don't attract what you want as if the universe is a vending machine. You collapse what you are willing to recognize as possible. And willing doesn't always mean conscious. Often it's emotional. It's the deep, repeating tone you carry: fear, trust, resentment, gratitude, shame, curiosity. These tones become the silent measurement device you bring to every moment. They decide what the world feels like before you've even gathered all the facts. You can see this most clearly in patterns that repeat. Consider someone carrying an old wound, maybe a betrayal, an abandonment, a humiliation that never fully dissolved. They move forward in time, but the lens stays the same. They meet new people, new situations, new rooms, and yet the same story keeps reappearing. They expect rejection, and so they hear rejection in neutral words. They expect distance, and so they interpret quietness as withdrawal. They expect betrayal, and so they scan constantly for signs that it's coming. And without realizing it, they keep collapsing the same emotional reality again and again. Different faces, same timeline. This is not because they are broken. It's because the observer is loyal to a frequency. The wound becomes a filter, and the filter becomes the world. But then sometimes something shifts, not through force, not through pretending the wound never happened, but through a new quality of observation. Instead of replaying the old story, the person pauses long enough to witness it. They feel the ache without building a future from it. They notice the fear without letting it become prophecy. They meet their own pain with compassion, like a hand placed gently on a trembling shoulder. And in that moment, the vibration changes. The past does not change in events, but it changes in meaning. And meaning is not a small thing. Meaning is the code that programs perception. When meaning shifts, the self shifts. And when the self shifts, the world that mirrors it shifts too. This is why healing can feel like stepping into another life without physically moving anywhere. The streets are the same, the faces are the same, but the timeline feels different, lighter, wider, more possible. The observer is different, and so the collapse is different. You've likely had a smaller version of this in your own day. A morning that started heavy, and then one simple moment softened you. A conversation that could have turned into conflict, but you paused and chose clarity. a worry that felt enormous until you breathed and watched it instead of feeding it. And suddenly, the day didn't have to be what it was about to become. That's not magic, it's selection. It's the quiet power of observation to reorganize the field of possibilities around you, first inwardly and then outwardly through the choices you make and the energy you bring. Because your emotion is not just something you feel, it's something you broadcast. And the world responds to what you broadcast, not as judgment, but as resonance. This isn't about controlling outcomes like a puppet master. It's about recognizing that you are not a detached witness of your life. You are participating in which version of life becomes visible. So, if you find yourself facing uncertainty, notice what the mind is doing. Notice whether it's collapsing the next moment into threat or leaving room for the unknown to reveal something kinder. Notice what kind of timeline your attention is selecting. And if you've ever felt a tiny shift in perception change the entire day, hold that thought for later, because the strangest part is what this does to time. Time is one of the first things we trust without question. We wake up, we look at a clock, and we feel ourselves placed onto a line, past behind us, future ahead. The present is a thin moving point we can barely hold. We're taught that time is the great conveyor belt carrying everything forward, and that we are simply passengers on it. And yet, the deeper physics goes, the less solid that story becomes. In the quantum world, time doesn't always behave like a straight arrow. It becomes less like a river and more like a strange landscape, one where events can feel entangled, where before and after are not always as clean as we want them to be, and where the present begins to look like something more than a passing instant. Because here is the quiet thing you can notice right now. Everything you have ever experienced is experienced in this moment. Even the past, when you remember your childhood, you are not traveling backward in time. You are recreating it now, calling an image, a sensation, an emotional tone into present awareness. Memory is not a window you open onto a fixed archive. It is a living construction that rises inside the field of consciousness each time you touch it. And the future is no different. When you imagine tomorrow, you don't step forward into it. You create a preview now, a mood, a mental picture, a tension in the body, a hope, a fear. The future appears as a feeling in the present, long before it arrives as an event. So, in a very real sense, past and future are both experiences occurring now. That doesn't mean history didn't happen. It means your contact with history, your relationship to what happened, always occurs in the present. And that relationship is not fixed. It can soften, it can tighten, it can change its meaning. This is why time feels different depending on the state of the observer. When you're anxious, minutes drag. The mind races ahead, rehearsing what might go wrong, and the future feels heavy as if it's already here. When you're joyful, hours vanish like a breath. When you're grieving, time thickens. When you're in flow, time disappears entirely. The clock doesn't change, but your experience of time does. And that alone is enough to suggest something profound. Time is not only an external dimension, it is also a mirror of consciousness. Quantum physics hints at this in its own strange ways. In experiments involving entanglement, two particles separated by great distance can behave as if they are still one system. Change the state of one, and the other seems to respond immediately, not as a message traveling through space, but as a correlation that appears beyond ordinary delay. However we interpret the mechanics, it whispers a possibility that at the deepest level, reality may not be stitched together the way our everyday senses assume, that separations we consider fundamental, here and there, now and later, might be surface-level descriptions of a deeper unity. And if consciousness is involved in how reality becomes definite, then time itself may not be what we were taught. Because what we call the present might not be a thin slice moving along a line. It might be the only place anything can ever become real. A portal. The present is where memory becomes vivid. The present is where anticipation becomes emotion. The present is where attention collapses possibility into experience. You cannot heal in the past, because the past is only reachable through the present. You cannot live in the future, because the future is only imaginable through the present. Every transformation, every insight, every shift in meaning happens here. That's why a single moment of awareness can change the entire relationship you have with your life story. You may have carried an old memory for years, like a stone in your pocket, and then, one quiet night, you look at it differently. Not with the old reflex of blame, shame, or fear, but with clarity, with compassion, with a more spacious gaze. The event remains what it was, but the vibration of it changes. The pain becomes information instead of identity. The wound becomes part of a larger story instead of the center of it. And when the meaning shifts, the self shifts. It's as if you collapse a new version of your past, not changing what occurred, but changing what it is inside you. A different emotional reality becomes true. The same applies to the future. Most of the time, we treat the future like a destination waiting ahead, already formed in some unseen place. We worry about it, we chase it, we fear it, we bargain with it. But if reality is a field of probabilities that becomes definite through observation, then the future may be less like a fixed destination and more like a soft cloud of options. A probability shaped by the state of your present attention. Every emotional tone you carry now is like a signal broadcast into that field. It's not that your thoughts magically control the cosmos. It's that your state of being shapes what you notice, what you choose, what you allow, and what you reinforce, until a certain path becomes more likely than others. The universe responds not to your calendar, but to your coherence. When you live in constant urgency, the future feels like a threat approaching. When you live in presence, the future feels like an unfolding. When you live in fear, you select timelines that confirm fear. When you live in openness, you notice openings. And this is the soft relief hidden inside the quantum view of time. You don't have to sprint toward tomorrow to find peace, because peace is not located in a later moment. It is a quality of attention you bring to this moment, and from that quality, the next moment emerges. So if you've ever caught yourself chasing tomorrow or replaying yesterday, try something gentle. Notice the body, the breath, the quiet hum behind the thoughts. Notice that awareness itself is not rushing. The mind moves, the world changes, the clock advances, but the witness of it all is still. It does not travel, it simply observes movement. And in that observation, something becomes clear. The true axis of time is not the clock. It's the quality of presence you are able to hold right now. Because this is where time bends. Not always in dramatic physics experiments, but in the simplest human ways, through meaning, through attention, through the choice to meet the moment without resistance. And if attention shapes time's texture, then emotion becomes more than chemistry. Every time we talk about observation shaping reality, it can still sound abstract, like something that only belongs in a lab, behind glass, under bright lights. But then time bends, and you begin to feel it in your own body. Because if the present is the portal where possibilities become experience, then what you bring into that portal matters. Not just what you think, but what you feel. The tone beneath your thoughts, the emotional weather you carry, even when you don't name it. And that's where this becomes strangely intimate. What if emotion isn't only chemistry? What if emotion is information, moving through you as a signal? Most people treat feelings as private, something contained inside the chest, something that only affects your inner world. But your body doesn't behave as if emotion is private. A single memory can change your heartbeat. A single fear can tighten your stomach. A single moment of gratitude can soften your jaw, lower your shoulders, slow your breath. Emotion changes physiology in seconds, like a current moving through a living circuit. And one of the most fascinating discoveries in modern research is that the heart is not just a pump. It is also an electrical generator. It produces an electromagnetic field that can be measured beyond the body, an actual field, not a metaphor. And that field shifts depending on your state. When you feel stressed, angry, overwhelmed, the rhythm becomes jagged, irregular, noisy. Your system becomes less coherent. It's as if the signal you're broadcasting is scattered. But when you feel calm, sincere gratitude, compassion, or quiet appreciation, the rhythm smooths, the pattern becomes more ordered, the whole system begins to synchronize, the heart, the breath, the nervous system, even the brain rhythms that ride on top of it. Researchers often call this coherence. Not perfection, not forced positivity, coherence. A state where your inner signals stop fighting each other and begin to align. And when alignment happens, something inside you becomes easier. You can feel it. The mind isn't gripping as tightly. Your perception widens. Decisions become clearer. The world feels less hostile and more navigable. Not because the world changed, but because the receiver is no longer full of static. This is why toxic positivity misses the point. Coherence is not pretending you're fine when you're not. Coherence is honesty without chaos. It's the ability to feel what's real in you, sadness, fear, fatigue, and still remain present enough that the emotion can move through without becoming a permanent filter. It's the difference between being aware of a storm and becoming the storm. Because ignored emotion doesn't vanish. It continues to broadcast from beneath awareness, shaping perception quietly. It becomes the lens you look through without realizing you're wearing it. That's why two people can walk into the same room and experience two different worlds. One arrives carrying resentment and sees disrespect everywhere. One arrives carrying openness and sees possibility. One arrives contracted and feels threatened. One arrives coherent and feels safe enough to be curious. Same room, different signal. And if the world is responsive, not judging, just responding, then emotional tone becomes part of the mechanism by which reality organizes around you. Not as superstition, as resonance. Think of a tuning fork. Strike it, and it vibrates at a particular frequency. Bring it near another object that can resonate at that frequency, and the vibration transfers. The environment begins to move in sympathy with the signal. In a similar way, your emotional state is like a tuning fork interacting with the field of your life. When you broadcast anxiety, you tend to notice what confirms anxiety. You choose defensively. You anticipate rejection. You speak with tension in your voice, even if you don't mean to. And those small signals shape responses, creating feedback loops that make the anxious world feel true. When you broadcast coherence, the loop changes. You listen better. You pause more often. You interpret ambiguity with gentleness. You respond instead of react. And slowly, the same world begins to reflect something different back to you. This is why practices that regulate the nervous system have such power. Not because they control the universe like magic, but because they reduce distortion in the observer. When the observer becomes coherent, the mirror becomes clearer. So, here's a gentle way to feel it without effort. Take a slow breath, just one. Let the inhale arrive without pulling. Let the exhale leave without pushing. Now, bring to mind something simple you're grateful for. Not a grand achievement, not a dramatic story, just something small and real. A warm blanket, a pet sleeping nearby, a friend's message, a cup of tea, the fact that you made it through the day. Let the gratitude be a warmth in the chest, not a thought in the head. And notice what happens. Often, the body responds immediately. The jaw loosens, the breath deepens, the heartbeat feels steadier. The mind stops sprinting for a moment and begins to settle into the present. That is coherence beginning. And from that coherence, your perception shifts. The world doesn't look as sharp-edged. Problems feel less like cliffs and more like hills. Your inner signal becomes cleaner, and what you receive from life becomes clearer too. This doesn't mean difficult emotions are wrong. It means difficult emotions need awareness. Because when fear is witnessed, it becomes information. When anger is witnessed, it becomes energy that can move. When sadness is witnessed, it becomes softness rather than collapse. Awareness is what turns emotion from distortion into clarity. And in the context of everything we've been exploring tonight, it suggests something quietly powerful. Your emotions are not just reactions to reality. They are part of the broadcast that shapes which reality becomes visible. So, when you find yourself stuck in a loop, meeting the same tension, the same disappointment, the same heaviness. Don't ask first, what's wrong with the world? Ask gently, what signal am I carrying? Not with blame, with curiosity. Because the moment you notice the signal, you regain choice. You can retune, not by forcing a fake smile, but by returning to sincerity, by breathing, by softening the body, by letting truth be felt without turning it into static. And when emotion and thought begin to align, when the signal smooths, you start to notice something else shifting too, the self. Most of us grow up believing the self is a solid thing, a name, a personality, a history, a set of traits that stay mostly the same from year to year, like a statue you carry through time. But if you sit with your own experience long enough, you start to notice something softer and far more honest. The you that wakes up in the morning is not always the same you that goes to sleep at night. Some days, you feel confident without trying. Your words come easily. The world feels workable. Other days, the smallest task feels heavy, and the same world looks sharper, colder, less forgiving. Nothing outside has necessarily changed, and yet you have. So what is the self really? Quantum physics offers a language that can feel strangely fitting here, not as a literal explanation of personality, but as a mirror for how identity behaves. In the quantum world, matter is not as solid as it seems. At the deepest level, what looks stable is actually made of motion, patterns of energy, probabilities, and relationships that hold together long enough to appear like a thing. In that sense, identity may be less like a rock and more like a waveform. A pattern that can be stable, yes, but only because it is continually reinforced. Your beliefs repeat. Your thoughts return to familiar grooves. Your emotions revisit the same themes. Your nervous system learns a default posture toward life, open or guarded, trusting or tense. And through repetition, that pattern begins to feel like me. But a pattern is not a prison. A pattern can change. And the truly surprising part is how quickly it can change once you notice it as a pattern. Think about how different versions of you appear, depending on what you're observing. When you're around someone who feels safe, a softer self emerges. You're more patient, more humorous, more generous with your attention. When you're around someone who triggers old fear, a different self rises, more defensive, more careful, more alert to danger. Same body, same name, different vibration. In this view, the self is not a single fixed point. It is a configuration of frequencies, beliefs, emotions, memories, assumptions that the mind stabilizes through attention. And when attention shifts, the configuration shifts. This is why authenticity can be such a confusing word. Many people imagine authenticity means finding one true self hidden beneath all the layers. But lived experience suggests something gentler. Authenticity is coherence. It's the alignment between what you think, what you feel, and what you express, right now. When those layers resonate together, you feel real, you feel clear, you feel like you are inhabiting your own life instead of performing it. And when they don't align, you feel the static. You might say yes while your body says no. You might smile while your chest tightens. You might act confident while your thoughts quietly doubt. That misalignment is not moral failure. It's simply incoherence, an internal signal split into competing waves. And here's the quiet power of seeing identity as vibration. If the self is a pattern stabilized by attention, then awareness gives you room to retune. Not by forcing yourself into a new personality overnight. Not by pretending you're someone you're not. But by noticing the frequency you're broadcasting and gently choosing a cleaner signal. You felt this in small moments. A single deep breath, and the anxious version of you loosens. A moment of gratitude, and the bitter version of you softens. A pause before reacting, and the old defensive self doesn't fully form. A sudden wave of compassion, and the unlovable story loses its grip. These are not just mood swings. They are shifts in identity. They are different versions of you becoming available because the observer changed the state of the system. And the world responds, not because reality is flattering you, but because you behave differently in each state. You interpret differently, you notice different details, you make different choices, you send different signals into your relationships, your work, your body, your future. The confident self speaks up and creates opportunities. The fearful self stays quiet and confirms limitation. The loving self forgives and opens timelines of connection. The guarded self withdraws and finds evidence of distance. Same world, but different collapse. This is why transformation often feels less like building a new self and more like remembering what was always possible. You are not manufacturing a better identity out of thin air. You are allowing old frequencies to dissolve, fear, shame, resentment, the static of old stories, so that a clearer pattern can emerge. The signal was always there. It was simply covered by noise. And when the noise quiets, you don't become someone else. You become more you. Not the rigid you made of labels and history, but the you that is flexible, alive, responsive, a living waveform moving through time. So, the next time you catch yourself saying, "This is just how I am," hold that sentence gently, because it may not be a truth. It may be a frequency you've rehearsed, and frequencies can be retuned. In fact, they are retuned all the time, by what you pay attention to, by what you believe, by what you practice, by what you forgive, by what you're willing to feel without turning it into a story. Identity is not carved in stone. It is composed in vibration. And when you begin to see that, something liberating happens. You stop clinging to any single version of yourself as final. You become fluid. You become creative. You become capable of stepping into a new timeline, not by escaping your life, but by changing the signal with which you meet it. And yet, you are not doing this alone, because no mind is truly isolated. Even when you're alone, your mind is never truly isolated. You can feel that in the simplest way, without needing any theory at all. Walk into a room where people have been arguing, and you'll sense it before anyone speaks. Something tight in the air, a kind of invisible pressure. Your shoulders rise a little. Your breathing gets smaller. Your thoughts narrow, as if your whole system is picking up a signal. And then, on another day, you step into a place where people are gentle with each other. Maybe a quiet cafe, a candlelit vigil, a concert where everyone is listening with soft attention. And your body responds the opposite way. Your jaw unclenches, your chest loosens, your mind stops scanning for threat. You haven't been given any new information, and yet you feel something real. That's the collective field, in miniature. A shared atmosphere made of thought, emotion, attention, countless private signals overlapping into something that becomes, strangely, public. We live inside one another's frequencies. We tune each other, even without words. And if the observer shapes reality on the personal level, then a group of observers, many minds holding a similar emotional tone, begins to shape something larger, not as magic, not as superstition, more like resonance. When enough instruments play the same note, the whole room vibrates. This is why your inner state matters beyond your own life. A calm mind doesn't just feel better inside your skin, it becomes a stabilizing presence in the spaces you move through. Your patience can slow someone else's storm. Your warmth can soften a conversation before it hardens. Your sincerity can give another person permission to breathe again. The world often tells us that change is only built through force, louder opinions, stronger arguments, harder pushing. But there is another kind of influence that happens quietly beneath the surface. Coherence spreads, so does agitation. And every day, in small, invisible ways, we contribute to the emotional architecture of the world we share. Not perfectly, not all the time, but more than we realize. If consciousness is a field, then the collective is not a metaphor. It's the lived experience of being human, how one person's fear can ignite a crowd, and how one person's peace can settle a room. And maybe that's the most grounding thought in all of this, that your awareness is never just yours. It's a ripple that travels, and the gentler you become inside, the gentler the field becomes around you. And now, we come back to the simplest place in the whole journey. Not back to an idea, not back to a theory, but back to the quiet fact of your own experience. Because underneath every explanation we have drifted through tonight, beneath the strange beauty of particles that behave like waves, beneath the feeling of time bending in the mind, beneath the sense that emotion can shape what you notice, there is something steady that has never moved. The awareness that is listening right now. You can test it gently, without effort. A sound appears and fades. A thought rises and dissolves. A sensation flickers in the body. Warmth, heaviness, a soft pulse, then changes into something else. Everything comes and goes, but the noticing of it remains. So, for a moment, let your attention do something small and curious. Instead of following the next thought, notice the space the thought appears inside. Instead of reaching for meaning, feel the simple presence that's already here, holding everything. And if you try to locate it, if you try to find the exact edge of awareness, something interesting happens. The more you look for its boundary, the more it feels open. Because the one who is searching is the very thing being searched for. The witness and the world, the observer and the observed. Not two separate objects facing each other across a distance, but one continuous field folding in on itself, becoming experience. This doesn't erase your life. It doesn't make you stop being a person with a name and a story and tomorrow's plans. It just softens the old tension, the feeling that you are trapped inside the mind, looking out at a world that's far away and unkind. In this quieter view, reality becomes intimate. The room you're in is not out there. It's appearing in awareness. The sound of my voice is not outside. It's forming in the same field where your thoughts form. Even the feeling of being you is an appearance within the witness. And when you see that, even if you only glimpse it for a second, the entire universe stops feeling like something you have to fight your way through and begins to feel like something you are meeting from within. So, if you're listening tonight with tired eyes and a heavy mind, let this be enough. You don't have to force anything. You don't have to solve the mystery. You can simply rest as the one who knows you are here. If you made it to this moment, I'd love to know you were with me. Just write, "I am the witness" in the comments. And if this kind of slow, calming exploration helps you unwind, you can gently tap like and subscribe to the Quantum Slumber so we can drift through more strange and beautiful questions together. Now let your shoulders drop just a little. Let the breath move at its own pace. And if sleep is close, you don't need to chase it. You can let it find you. Good night, my friend. And may your mind grow quiet as the witness remains.